Compensation has multiple facets to it. Really, when we're talking about compensation as a general topic, we mean total compensation. And total compensation is made up of several factors. First of all is base pay. And really, as managers, you're not going to have a lot of control over base pay. You may help decide where someone fits within a range, but you're not going to get into the nuances of how to determine base pay. That's usually for HR, that's their job. Then there's pay for performance, which is what you actually will be taking part in rather. And pay for performance is really focused on how do we use compensation to reward people for past behavior or create incentives for future behaviors. Lastly, the last aspect of compensation or total compensation is indirect pay or benefits. Again, you will probably have very little influence or impact on the benefits that employees get, but it's important for you to understand where it fits in the larger context. So total comp is base pay, pay for performance, and indirect pay. You will have your greatest impact on the pay for performance aspect of total compensation. So when we think about what our goals are in using compensation, recognize that we have several different kind of factors that we're trying to predict. We're trying to attract people, motivate people, and retain people. And there are 4 different kinds of pay that we can utilize: base pay, short-term incentives, long-term incentives, and benefits. So your pay for performance is really that stuff in the middle. It's the short-term and long-term incentives. And those things have a huge impact on attracting people to the organization. As a rule, the short term is much better at attracting than the longer term. Short-term incentives are really good at motivating people. Moderate impact with long-term incentives, but long-term incentives really have the greatest impact on retaining people. So we use short-term incentives to attract people to the organization, to get them motivated to work on a daily basis, but we use our long-term incentives, things like employee stock plans and also, investment in, profit sharing and things like that. Those are longer term incentives, and that keeps people coming in. And pension plans keep people retained in the organization because no one wants to lose their vesting. Short-term incentives like, merit pays and unit pay for how many products you make or sales commissions, those are all short-term incentives. Benefits and base salary have the greatest impact on attracting and retaining workers, but really have very little impact on motivating people, which is, again, why it's not really something we worry about for managers, because you don't really have a lot of control over base pay and benefits, but you do have control over the incentives and the pay for performance stuff. And so with base pay, just as a quick overview, the role that you'll play in base pay is helping to evaluate or figure out what the value is of that job to the company. So you will be asked to assess what's the proper education level, how much experience people should have, how much responsibility is in the job, physical demands, and the working conditions. And these are what we call compensable factors. And you'll be asked to assess those by your HR professional. Once we have evaluated the job, we have a sense of what they're worth to the company, we have to then create what we call internal equity, so that lower paying jobs are really low value jobs to the company and higher paying jobs are high value. And it should be in a positive linear relationship, right? So it's proportional, but we all know, of course, that CEO pay and top management team pay is a little out of whack. So you might see your top management team paid significantly higher than the rest of the organization, but usually up to middle management, it follows a fairly clear, line of regression, if you will, where people, there's a certain rate of pay and a certain rate of pay versus value to the company. The other factor that you need to take into account is, besides things like company strategy, right? You have to understand the company strategy when you're thinking about what you're going to pay people and where your pay line sits in terms of what the dollar value is associated with each job. You have to consider market pressure, right? What's going on outside the company, what's going on in the economy. Is there competition for particular jobs? Is there very little competition for jobs? Is there a high supply of workers? Is there a low supply of workers? So all these factors come into play. And then, of course, strategy plays a role here, right? If you are a differentiation strategy company, if your goal is to be able to differentiate yourself based on highly skilled workers and really expensive and high-end products and services, then you're gonna pay more money for your workers. But if you are focused on cost leadership, like a Walmart is, then you're not going to pay your workers high amounts of money, or you're actually going to pay them on the lower end. So company strategy, market pressures, supply and demand, all these things are sort of influence, where, external equity, how we pay relative to the market. And then we make decisions to lead, lag, or match the market based on what our strategy is. Paying for performance, merit pay is about how we pay people for past performance. We look at their pay in the past. We then make a determination of what that's worth. Merit pay is typically considered compounded into your base pay, so it increases your base pay. So you might get a merit increase of 10% or 5% or 2%, and that merit increase is then compounded into your pay. It works just like, compound interest. But the problem with that is companies don't like to continue to pay a higher rate of salary if your performance sort of, falls off after a while. And so if someone you're continually paying at a higher rate, even if someone is not a good performer over the long haul, but if they were really good the first few years, that bumps their pay up really quickly, and then everything kind of compounds after that. So because companies don't really like doing that, they would much rather pay for performance on an annual basis. You're more likely to see a bonus plan. And a bonus plan is a lump sum plan at the end of the year. Again, also rewards past performance, but it's a clean slate every year. It doesn't get compounded in. So I get a bonus based on what my last year's performance was. It's not known up front, but I can, once I get that bonus, that bumps up my pay for the year, then I go back to the clean slate. And so the company is not compounding the rate at which they pay people. If you want to have increases that aren't necessarily linked to merit, then that would be cost of living adjustments. And some companies are focused on doing that, although a lot of pay has lagged behind the cost of living, as we know, which is one of the major problems and concerns that a lot of the working population has. But getting politics aside, the goal here with merit and bonus is really to recognize that it's based on past performance. We don't always know what we're going to get. Merit works like compound interest. Bonuses are a lump sum payment. Even if you get the same percentage every year, the merit pay will increase faster. And so with a merit pay system, even if you get the same 10% bonus every year, that adds up. And you'll grow much faster because of the compounding effect. Incentives are really the general way that companies like to work on some factors. And we already talked in the beginning of the class about intrinsic motivators versus extrinsic motivators. And what we're talking about purely here right now is extrinsic motivators. We're not getting into the intrinsic ones. We've already talked about that in the context of motivation. But with incentives here, what we're talking about is we want incentives for future performance, right? So people know up front what to expect. Like, I know I'll get a 10% commission every single time I sell something, whatever that is. And our compensation, when it comes to incentives, works at multiple levels: at the individual, the group, at the business unit, and at the organization level. And at the individual level, it's usually an incentive for an individual person, usually a commission of some sort. At the group level, it's sort of rewarding the group for better performance. At the business unit, we're really talking about gain sharing or gains in productivity. And as we make gains in productivity every year, as we save money based on being more efficient in what we do, those gains are then shared with your employees. And then at the organization level, we're talking about stock options and profit sharing and things like that. But it's really important, as we see at the bottom, being careful what you reward for. We're not rewarding. Don't reward for something that that is not relevant. So if you want people to work in teams, You reward people for working in teams. If you want people to work individually, reward them for working individually, but don't tell them you want them working in teams and then only reward them for working individually. Don't worry about those two references, the John Crosby and the Wilson. That's based on a case that I've done previously and have not done for this particular class. So pay for performance in the incentive systems, we have to be incredibly careful, just like we would with performance appraisal, of evaluating and rewarding what's important to us. We can't be one-dimensional in what we reward people because that's all you're going to get. People put blinders on. So we want to make sure we have a wide variety of things that we're using to determine compensations, for particularly pay for performance, so that pay is linked to the multi-factors that are involved in our jobs.